So hi everybody, my name is Brittany Harried, and as Laura said, I now work at the Missouri Department of Conservation on our resource assessment and monitoring program. So I primarily work in small streams in the state of Missouri, looking at small stream fish, but any opportunity I get to talk about fish in general, I always jump on. So I'm really excited to talk to you all about the fishes that we find in the Missouri River. Before I get to talking about the fish though, I want to talk about the Missouri River itself. So the Missouri River is the longest river in the United States. The watershed includes more than 500,000 square miles, which includes 10 states and 1 Canadian province and covers 1/6 of the whole United States. So this is a massive river basin. It is important for agriculture, providing a water supply for the folks that live within the basin, providing power through hydroelectric dams, flood control, provides a great habitat for fish and wildlife, provides a lot of water quality resources for folks who live in this basin as well, and provides irrigation for agriculture and navigation for moving resources up and down the river. And one other important point I'd like to make is that Missouri's portion of the Missouri River is unimpounded, meaning that we do not have any dams on it, which is pretty awesome. Yes, that does it really. So if we focus more on just Missouri, which is going to be where I'm really focusing my talk on, the Missouri River Basin covers a large portion of the state, and outside of the Missouri River flowing through from west to east here, we have the Osage River and the Gaston River flowing from south to north of James River, and then we have the Sheraton and the Grand River flowing from north to south into the Missouri River. So a lot of other big river systems in Missouri that contribute into the Missouri River. I also wanted to kind of talk about how we have these different fauna regions in Missouri. So our state is split up into these 3 different regions, and they play a really large role in shaping the fish communities. So to the north, we primarily have our prairie region. So you can think about this as a lot of our prairie streams. So they're going to usually be turbid, more channelized, more silt and sand and gravel substrates. To the south, we have our Ozark region. So these are going to be characterized by really clear streams, high gradient because of the elevation changes with the Ozarks. And these are going to be more consistent with short pools with well-defined riffles that have more gravel, bedrock, and boulder substrate. And then down into the lowlands, down into the Butte Heel, this is going to be a mix of streams, wetlands and ditches that range from clear water to water affected with lots of tannins to more turbid water with silt, sand, and occasionally gravel substrates. So all of these different changes in the habitat types really have an impact on the fish communities that live in the state. I also wanted to highlight the fish diversity in Missouri in general. So the warmer colors on this map indicate a higher species diversity. So in general, the southeast United States is really diverse for freshwater fish. And in Missouri, we have approximately 243 known fishes in the state. About 230 of those are native, 10 are transient, which just means that they're only here for part of the year, usually associated with migration for reproduction. And then we also have 17 non-native species that attribute to that count as well. So a lot of you are probably familiar with some of the invasive species listed and pictured here, like goldfish and a lot of other invasive carp species. And more recently, the snakehead that have been in the news invading in the southern part of the state. But we're not going to focus on the non-native fishes today. We're going to focus on our native fish that reside in the Missouri River. So before we kind of get into that long list, I also just wanted to show the diversity of fishes that we have in Missouri, looking at the different fish families. So we have about 29 families of fish in the state, which is pretty awesome. And reside in the Missouri River. So all of the ones that are highlighted or disclosed here are groups that I'm going to talk about today. I won't be going over all of the fish that are in those groups, and there are certainly fish in those groups. For example, the sunfishes and the perches, where we might find some species living in the river, but then other species that don't live in the river at all, and we only find them in very small streams, say in the Ozarks or the prairies or the lowlands. But we're going to go through and talk about some representative individuals from each of these groups in the talk today. So starting at the top, we've got our chestnut lamprey. Most of the species I've included in the talk today too. I've also included the scientific name and kind of what it means. To me, this is really interesting, and it also helps connect with why that fish was named the way it was. So with our chestnut lamprey, the scientific name is Ichthyomyzon castaneus, and this means fish to suck and of chestnut color. As you can see, the fish is brown in color, so that makes sense. And this is one of 2 parasitic lamprey species that we have in the state. We do have a total of 5 lamprey, but the other 3 are wood lamprey and are non-parasitic. The adults of the chestnut lamprey reach maturity at about 10 to 12 inches, and the adults will actually migrate out of the big rivers into the smaller rivers for spawning in late winter and into the spring. So moving on to our next group of the sturgeon, the first species I want to talk about was our shovel-nosed sturgeon. So the scientific name for this one is Scaphrancus cloytorhynchus, meaning spade snout and broad snout. This is our smallest sturgeon species in North America, up to about 30 inches at its biggest size and 5 pounds. And it's also the most abundant sturgeon species in Missouri. Despite it being the most abundant, we still have been seeing declining numbers over time, likely due to a mix of overharvesting, dam construction, and habitat alteration. The shovel-nosed sturgeon live for approximately 14 years and become sexually mature at 5 to 7 years. So it takes quite a while for them to be able to reproduce after hatching from eggs. And they have been documented to travel up to 560 miles for spawning. So they really need a lot of river miles that are unimpounded by those dams in order to successfully complete their spawning. Am I good to keep going? Okay. They're also a permitted sport fish for recreation only. The commercial fishing aspect of these has been knocked out entirely because of how similar they look to the pallid sturgeon. So our pallid sturgeon, named Scaphrancus albus, means spade snout and white. This is both federally and state endangered. They reach sizes of about 5 feet and 100 pounds at the largest, and they can live up to about 40 years, with the males reaching maturity at 7 years and the females reaching maturity at 15 to 20 years. So again, a really long lag time until they're able to reproduce. And their numbers have been declining rapidly due to a mix of overharvesting, dam construction, and habitat loss. And then our biggest sturgeon species in the state is the lake sturgeons. This is Acropensor fulvescens. So this means sturgeon and reddish yellow, which refers to their color. They can reach 8 feet and 300 pounds, and they were common and they're a common and economically important fish in Missouri prior to the 1900s, with 50,000 pounds being harvested from the Missouri and Mississippi rivers in just 1894 alone. The males can take up to 10 years to reach sexual maturity, and the females can take up to 30 years. So again, same thing as the other sturgeon species. They take a really long time to become sexually mature. And they also need a lot of river miles that are unimpounded in order to migrate to their natal streams for spawning. So they're heavily impacted by the dams. So similar to the other sturgeon species, a mix of overharvesting, pollution, and dam construction has led to their decline. And they were listed as state endangered in the 1970s. And Missouri began stocking them in the 1980s to help recover these populations. And for some really exciting news with the lake sturgeon, in April of last year, there was documented spawning on the Osage River. So someone was out fishing on the Osage and they saw what looked like to be some large fish thrashing around in the really shallow water on the edges where the rocks were. And so they called some fisheries biologists and they came and checked it out. And this was the first documented natural spawning in the Osage River. So this was really exciting news for the species. And one other thing that I forgot to mention with kind of the first group of I'm covering in this talk is that these are also all living dinosaurs. So you can go back into the fossil record hundreds of millions of years ago and still see them relatively unchanged. So it's pretty exciting to say that we have living dinosaurs in the state. So our next monster fish is the paddlefish. This is Polyodon spatula, meaning many tooth and spatula or blade. The many tooth refers to the gill rakers here that they use to filter feed their food out of the water. And then the spatula or blade refers to their rostrum, which is this extension on their face that has a lot of sensory pores that allows them to hunt out the food that they're filter feeding. This is one of the largest North American freshwater fishes, and they can reach up to 7 feet and 160 pounds. And they are Missouri's officially designated aquatic animal as well.
We do also have a state fish, which I'll get to later. So I'm not sure what that means beyond the fact that they're a designated aquatic animal. But yeah, that's a great question. Nope. This is also the only living member of its family on Earth. So the Chinese paddlefish went extinct in the 2000s, and this was the only living relative. So we have the last paddlefish on Earth as well. They grow really quickly from young, so they can grow up to 10, 14 inches their first year, and at age 17, they can reach 60 inches in size. They're also valued as a sport fish and for their caviar. So that feeding behavior that I mentioned means that they're swimming continuously while they're feeding and filter feeding, and so they're usually swimming near the surface of open waters and big rivers. And similar to the sturgeon, dam construction, stream channelization, levee construction, and drainage of bottomlands have cut off a lot of their habitat that they need for spawning and just for their general ecology. Because of the decline in this species due to overharvesting, illegal poaching, trafficking, and invasive species, we started to stock this fish as well by using hatchery raised fish to help maintain their populations. And one of the big threats when I mentioned invasive species is actually the zebra mussels that have become widespread. So the zebra mussels are also a filter feeder. And so when they're removing phytoplankton from the water, they're taking that food from fish like paddlefish that need that as well. Moving on to our next group with the gar. We actually have 4 gar species in the state, but there's only 2 that I'll talk about that you can commonly find in the Missouri River. And our 4 gar species in the state of Missouri are 4 out of 7 of all of the gar species in the world, which are all found in North America. So the long-nosed gar, its name is Lepisosteius osseus, which means bony scale and of bone. So if you ever get to see a gar up in person, you'll be able to feel this bony exterior that they have. So their scales are actually made up of something called dentin, which is really similar to the enamel in our teeth. So they really have a bony armor protecting their whole bodies. These fish can get quite large, reaching up to 60 inches and 30 pounds, and they can grow up to 20 inches in their first year. So similar to the paddlefish, they grow really quickly. The males tend to mature at 3 to 4 years of age, and females mature later at 6 years. The males typically also live for a shorter time relative to the females at 11 years and do not exceed more than 3 feet in length, whereas the females are longer lived at 20 years and can reach 4.5 feet or more in length. And then our other species that's really common in the Missouri River is the short-nosed gar. So compared to the long-nosed gar, they have a much shorter snout and it's a little wider as well. And their name means bony scale and broad mouth. They can reach up to about 32 inches and 6 to 11 pounds, and they can grow up to 7 inches in just a few months. So again, that strategy of growing really quickly as a young means that you're also going to be outgrowing the things that can eat you. So it's a really good survival tactic. These fish can also become sexually mature at 3 years and about 15 inches, so a little sooner than their cousins. And I always love to show what I think are really cute pictures of gar. They get a really bad rap, but I don't know how you can't look at this photo and smile, because I think it's really cute. Despite their needle teeth, they're not an aggressive fish at all. They're not going to come swim up to you and attack you. They're going to want to get away from you. These fish can also breathe air, so they can survive really well in low oxygen environments. And they're just really, really neat fish. So there's been a lot of changes in kind of public perception and even perception within like the scientific and fisheries realm with gar over time. So this is kind of a clip from an article in the 1950s and an image of dynamite being used to remove a school of gar from a stream. So historically, gar were considered to be a nuisance trash fish, and people thought that they're out there and they're either eating the food for the fish that we want or they're eating the fish that we want. But we have a better understanding of how they function in their ecosystems now, and we now know that they are really important keystone predators. So they're kind of equivalent to the wolves in Yellowstone. And so they serve as a really good natural control in preventing overpopulation in our streams and rivers and making sure that our fish populations are balanced. So our next group are the moon eyes. And in particular, I'm showing us about the gold eye. This is the most common fish from this group in the Missouri River. Its scientific name means toothed hyoids. So in this picture here, You can see the tooth that are on basically its tongue. And it also has, the name also means polished, so it's a very silvery iridescent fish with very large eyes. They can reach about 13 inches and 3/4 of a pound, so a still decently sized fish. They're also a predatory fish and they feed well at night, so those big eyes really allow them to absorb a lot of low light in order to be efficient predators. In addition, they also serve as a fish host for the state and federally endangered freshwater mussel called the spectacle case, who uses the moon eye and the gold eye as their primary larval hosts. So there are a lot of mussel species that cannot reproduce without a fish, and they're actually co-evolved to needing that fish around to reproduce. So if that fish isn't there, the mussel isn't going to be able to reproduce and they're going to decline. So the fish play a really important role in their ecosystem in this way as well. Our next group is looking at our freshwater eels, and this is the American eel. Now, this is a less common fish that you'd be likely to see in the Missouri River, but it is thought that they likely occur in every large stream in the state. Their scientific name, Anguilla rostrata, means eel and beaked. The females often reach about 16 to 33 inches in size, whereas the males only reach a maximum of about 18 inches. And all eels in Missouri are female, as the males actually stay back in the estuaries. This is a migratory fish that will migrate from freshwater to saltwater for reproduction. So the males will actually stay in the estuaries and the saltwater, and the females are the ones that go up into freshwater and come back. But as with some of the other fish that we've already talked about tonight, their migration is also restricted by dams. And so this is affecting their ability to migrate for reproduction. Moving on to the next group is our shads and herrings. I really just wanted to focus on a couple of these that are more common. Really, the gizzard shad is the most common one to see in the Missouri River, but the Alabama shad is also a really important species here as well. Its scientific name basically means shad and from Alabama. The adults reach 18 inches and about 3 pounds, and this is a species of conservation concern, and they're at risk of extirpation from the state, which means that we could lose them entirely from Missouri, but they won't be lost, period. So they would still exist in other parts of their range. And then the gizzard shad is the most common shad species you're going to find in Missouri, and especially in the Missouri River. Its scientific name means lance body, and it was also named after Satoyan Lasipede, who's an author. The lance body refers to the shape of the fish when they're really young. They're one of the most common and widely distributed of the larger Missouri fishes, and they will form schools and swim together in the rivers and are very active at night, and will often jump out of the water, especially when they're going after their prey. So they've earned themselves the nickname skipjack, which is not to be confused with another species we have in Missouri called the skipjack herring, which is a different fish. So our next group is the minnows. This is often a pretty big misnomer, so a lot of people will call any small fish a minnow, but keep in mind that even some of these giant fish that we've talked about, every fish starts off small. So not every small fish is a minnow, but we do have a lot of minnows. In Missouri, we have approximately 64 species that fall into this minnow family, and this includes our minnows, like the ones pictured on the right, shiners, chubs, stone rollers, and dace. They tend to be short-lived and small-bodied, with most species being a maximum of 3 inches or smaller, but some can reach 7 to 12 inches in this group. They primarily feed on insects and plant material, and they play a really important role in converting nutrients into food for larger predators. So since they're eating things lower on the food chain and then being consumed by fish or other animals higher on the food chain, they provide a really nice bridge for all those nutrients. So one of the big groups within this minnow group are the shiners. And I've pictured some really common ones that you'd be likely to find either in the Missouri River or in the direct tributaries to the Missouri River. So this includes things like the red shiner and the redfin shiner, the emerald shiner and the carmine shiner, our small ghost shiner, and this really pretty silverband shiner, and then these common shiners, which can actually get quite large, up to about 6 or 7 inches compared to those other ones. So the shiners are typically found more in the water column or at the surface of the water. And if you've ever seen videos of piranhas feeding, that's what these make me think of. They're really voracious feeders, and so when something falls onto the surface of the water, they're usually popping up trying to eat at it. So they have this really strong striking behavior while feeding, and partly for that reason, but partly because some of these fish are just gorgeous when they're in their breeding colors, they've become really popular for microfishing. And if you all haven't heard about what microfishing is, it's this really increasing popular trend where people will take a really small fishing pole and very, very small hooks and go out to small streams or even streams like the Missouri River and casting out and see what they get. And they're looking for species diversity rather than, you know, the big lunkers of like their sport fish. So it's a really fun hobby if you all are looking to take up a new one. And then the last group of fish that I'm going to talk about in the kind of minnows group are our chubs. These tend to be more specialized for inhabiting the bottoms of our large turbid rivers like the Missouri River. They also tend to have reduced eye sizes or even skin flaps that mostly cover their eyes. Because they're in really turbid water, their eyesight is less important when they're looking for their food. And so a lot of these fish will also actually have increased number or sizes of external taste buds. So when they're swimming around in the bottom, they can basically smell or taste their food as they're approaching it and find it that way. And typically where you find a lot of fish, like the ones listed on the bottom here, you're not going to find a lot of other small-bodied fishes there. Like the minnows and the shiners, these also tend to be small-bodied and short-lived, and generally reach maximum sizes between 3 to 6 inches. Yep. Yeah, so the question was if these fish are bottom feeders. So one thing I should have mentioned is depending on the location of the mouth on the fish, that can tell you a lot about where they live in the water and what they eat. So for the fish, like all these chubs where their mouths kind of open up to the bottom, that tells you that they're eating a lot of food off the bottom. So they're probably sifting through detritus or sand looking for like snails or other like little worms. A lot of fish that have their mouths that kind of open out on the end, so think like your bass and your sunfish, they're going to be more likely predatory fish that are chasing after their food, and then fish that have their mouths facing up are usually eating things off the surface of the water. And so that's usually where you'll find them living too. So one other thing I wanted to mention about this specific group within the minnows is their relationship with sturgeon in our state. So these 4 species listed on the right, the flathead chub, sicklefin chub, speckled chub, and sturgeon chub, are really important food sources for sturgeon. So sturgeon are also eating things like macroinvertebrates down at the bottom of the river where they're living, but they're also predating on fish. And these species in particular also serve as a food source for the federally endangered pallid sturgeon. So keeping these fish around in our rivers is also helping out our sturgeon. Additionally, the sturgeon chub on the bottom here, its common name, sturgeon chub, comes from the fact that its head looks very similar shaped to the sturgeon compared to the other chubs. Additionally, they also both face similar environmental challenges in terms of water quality and habitat loss. They also live in similar parts of the river, and so they're experiencing the same kind of environmental pressures. And they also have similar foraging strategies. So even though they're not related at all, they look pretty similar for those reasons. And that's something that we see with like a lot of fish all over the world too. When they have really similar habitat and food requirements, they tend to look the same even if they're not related. So our next group is looking at suckers. And the first one that I want to talk about is the blue sucker. So the scientific name for this one is Cycleptus elongatus, meaning small round mouth and elongate. They tend to live for about 10 years, and the males become sexually mature at 4 years, and the females become sexually mature later at about 6 years. This fish used to be of great economic and commercial importance and is said to be the best food fish of all the suckers, but I personally haven't eaten one, so I couldn't tell you. The world record blue sucker was caught in 2023 in Missouri, weighing in at 11 pounds and 5 ounces, and that's the one pictured on the right here. This blue sucker is also considered to be a sentinel species for river health. So when places that you find these, you're probably going to have pretty good water quality and good habitat as well. So it's always going to be a good sign if you see these in the river. And then the other suckers that I wanted to talk about are the buffalo or the buffalo fishes. The first one and the biggest one in the state is the bigmouth buffalo. Their scientific name is Ichthyobus cyprinellus, which means bullfish and small carp, and that's just because they resemble carp. It is our biggest sucker species in the state, with a maximum size of about 48 inches and 80 pounds. And their lifespan can range up to about 127 years. I have aged a different species of buffalo before, and they are very difficult to age, but they do get quite old. That's a great question. So I was asked, how do you age fish? So there are several different structures that you can use on a fish to age them, but the most common and the most accurate one is to measure their rings on their ear bones. So we've got little bones in our ears that help us with balance, and fish have the same thing. So if you take those out of a fish, the way those are grown over the course of the fish's life is that you have all these minerals that start depositing, and you get periods of the year in which they're growing quickly, so they're depositing a lot of materials versus growing slowly in the winter where they're not depositing as much. So when you cut through that ear bone, which is called an otolith, or it's one of the three bones, it's called the otolith, you can actually look at the rings and count them like you would on a tree, and you can count and see how many rings there are. The tricky part is sometimes you'll get, they're called like false rings, like checks, that take a lot of experience to age. I know the folks who aged these fish in this study have been working on aging buffalo in particular for a long time, so they have a lot of experience, but I'd say that's the most common way to age a fish. But you can also sometimes take the scales off of their body and count the rings on those too. That can just be a little bit misleading because fish can lose and regrow their scales. So if you happen to get one that they've lost and regrown, you're going to underage them. You can also take the hard spines off of a fish, so like say this first spine on like the dorsal fin here, and you can cut through that, and that will also have rings on it like a tree does, but those can be reabsorbed sometimes if there's not a lot of food around for that fish. So again, it's also, you can tend to underage that way too. Yeah, great question. So in general, for the buffalo fishes, they rank second in importance to carp in the commercial fishery in the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. So not only are these big fish, but they also provide a lot of food resources as well. The next biggest buffalo fish that we have in the state is the black buffalo. Its scientific name means bullfish and darker black, which refers to the color on like the fins in the body that's darker compared to the bigmouth and the smallmouth buffalo. They reach a length of about 20 to 30 inches and a maximum weight of 53 pounds. And their lifespan can range up to about 108 years. So another really long-lived fish. And actually the state record was caught in 2019 from Duck Creek Conservation Area with a 76-pound fish. So they get quite large as well. And then our last buffalo fish for the state is the smallmouth buffalo, and it's my favorite because it's super cute. Its scientific name means bullfish and buffalo. They're very kind of meaty, like our American buffalo that we think of. They are considered the smallest of the buffaloes with a length of 15 to 30 inches and a maximum weight of 40 pounds, but they're also long-lived and have been aged up to 101 years. And then the last fish that I'm going to talk about in this sucker group is the shorthead red horse. We do have other red horse species in the state, but this one is the most common and the most likely that you'd find in the Missouri River. Its scientific name means mouth to suck and large scales. And for all of the red horse in the state, if you take a look at their lips, the shape of the structures on their lips and the shape of the lips overall can tell you what species you're looking at. The other thing that you need to do is start counting scales along their lateral line, which gets really tricky, especially when you have a live fish in your hands. So the lip shape is really helpful. And they also use this functionally, so it's not just for us to ID them, but they can use that to feel around for their food when they're swimming in the bottom of the rivers and sense for things. So the shorthead red horse in particular is the most widely distributed red horse in Missouri, and the adults can reach 9 to 16 inches and just over 4 pounds. And in general, red horse are really common for gigging and for eating in Missouri in the spring as well. Moving on to the next group with the catfish. The channel catfish, its scientific name means fish cat and spotted. And the spotted comes from the young that have this like polka dot pattern on their side, which tends to disappear as they get older. The adults grow to approximately 12 to 32 inches and 1 to 15 pounds with a max of around 45 pounds, so another really large fish. Their lifespan is typically 6 to 10 years, so a little on the shorter side compared to especially the buffalo fishes. They are omnivores. They'll eat everything from fish to insects, crayfish, mollusks, and plant material. They are also the most abundant and widely distributed catfish in Missouri, and they were established as our official Missouri state fish in 1997. They're also one of the most highly prized game and food fishes in Missouri. Folks love to fish for them individually, but they're also really important commercially as well. Our other sizable catfish species in Missouri is our blue catfish. Their scientific name means fish cat and forked, and the fork refers to that deep fork in their tail fin or that caudal fin. The adults commonly reach about 20 to 44 inches in size and 3 up to 40 pounds, but recent record weights have included fish up to 115 to 130 pounds, so they can get quite large. They have a lifespan of approximately 21 years, maybe a little longer, and they're also another highly valued food fish. They're also carnivorous, which is a little different in some cases from the channel catfish. And so they play a really important role controlling populations of invertebrates in some fishes. And then our third big catfish that you can find in the Missouri River is the flathead catfish. So its scientific name means mudfish in olive colored. So that refers to the color and the patterning on the fish. One thing I forgot to show in the previous slide is the different type of teeth that catfish have. So they have teeth that feel more like Velcro or kind of sandpaper, and so they can use that when they're preying on things to kind of get a hold of their food. And they have really strong jaws as well. So you can see that in both pictures, but it was a little better at the blue catfish. So the flathead catfish, unlike the blue and the channel, rarely eat dead or decaying material. They're also another important commercial and sport fish. And prior to the commercial fish for catfish clothing, harvest for this species was more than 208,000 pounds. They've also colloquially known in the Ozarks as granny cats, which I think is pretty cute. So the next group are the smelt, and this is our rainbow smelt. The scientific name means odorous and biting. This is a predatory fish. They range from about 7 to 9 inches in size and up to 3 ounces. And I haven't personally handled a live one, but I've read that when you remove them from the water, they smell like fresh cut cucumbers. I don't know if anyone here can attest to that or not. But, they also appear to shimmer under the water. And so that's where they get their name rainbow smelt. And they're a really popular fish for eating, and they also provide really good food source for a lot of other bigger predatory fish where they're found. The next group are our live bearers. These are going to be less commonly seen in the Missouri River and more so the direct tributaries to the Missouri River. But this is our western mosquito fish. So as that group name suggests, they do give live birth. So the females will get quite rotund in the spring and the summer, and they will give live birth to precocial young that can move around and eat and survive on their own. The males tend to be quite a bit smaller than the females, but in general, adults reach about 1 1/4 to 2 3/4 inches. So they're quite a small fish. The scientific name is derived from a provincial Cuban word, gambusino, meaning useless, and then affinis means related. And this name came about because this fish was stocked worldwide to help eat mosquito larvae, to help deal with a lot of human disease impacts that mosquitoes are causing. But unfortunately, they did not live up to their name in most places, and they will preferentially eat other fish eggs and fish larvae, so they can actually have a really negative impact on the environments that they're released into. They will eat mosquito larvae, it's just not usually their first choice. And a study in northeastern Missouri also showed that they are a primary predator of the boreal forest frog. So not only are they impacting other fish in their environments, but also other taxa as well. Moving to the next group, the temperate basses. We have several fish that fall into this family. Here I've just highlighted the white and the striped bass, which I will say the striped bass is not native. though it's quite common, and the yellow bass, which I did not picture here. The striped bass, which is the non-native fish, gets significantly larger than the white bass and the yellow bass. And they can reach sizes of 26 to 40 inches and up to 60 pounds. And hybrids between the striped bass and the white bass have been stocked by NBC in many impoundments around the state because of their ability to reach trophy fish status. So the picture on the bottom is a state record striped bass caught in Bull Shoals Lake down on the Arkansas border in 2015. And some diet studies have shown that they actually have very little overlap in terms of what they're eating with other predatory fish. So they work really great for trophy fisheries. Because of their size and their fight that they give during fishing, they've become a really popular game fish. And then, as I mentioned, we do have some native fish. So the white and yellow are both native, despite the striped bass not being native. Next, we're going to move into our sunfish and basses group. So I kind of lumped some of these together. So this is a small grouping of sunfishes that you'd be likely to see in the Missouri River. So this includes the green sunfish, the long-ear sunfish, the orange-spotted sunfish, and the bluegill. The long-ear gets its name from that really long opercular flap that kind of looks like an ear. And the orange-spotted sunfish looks very similar to long-ear, but has much larger orange dots along the sides. They all fall into the genus Lepomis, which means scaled gill cover. So you'll find scales on their gill cover here. They're all a very popular sport fish that people love to go fishing for and to eat. The maximum size for any of these species is up to about 10 inches and 1 pound. And they play a really important role as aquatic predators in their environments. The males will also build and guard nests. So during the spring and summer, if you're ever in some of the smaller streams and you see these cleared out circles, those are likely going to be sunfish or bass nests. So the males will clear out a lot of the silt to provide a really good nesting area for females to deposit their eggs, and then they will guard those eggs until they hatch. So if you also ever really want to target sunfish, they're very, what I'm looking for. Protective, yeah. They're very protective of their nests, so they're really aggressive if you're fishing near them, and they'll probably bite whatever you're throwing. Interestingly, too, the orange-spotted sunfish in particular, well, any of these sunfish, but this one in particular, other species will sometimes also use their nests. So we have a federally endangered fish called the Topeka shiner that primarily uses orange-spotted sunfish nests for their reproduction, which is really cool. So it's great when you see them co-occurring. We also have some notable bass that you can find in the Missouri River, which includes the spotted bass and the largemouth bass. The genus Micropterus means small fin. The reading I was doing on that said that the type specimen they used to come up with the name had a notch or an injury at the back of the dorsal fin that they thought was actually an extra small fin on the backside, which is why that name came about. Their maximum size is about 24 inches and 15 pounds, but those would be pretty massive fish and are not representative of what you're going to catch on a normal day on the river. But they are a really popular sport fish, and there's a lot of professional tournaments centered around these species as well. Their lifespan is about 10 to 15 years, which is more than the sunfish on the previous slide. They're also really important aquatic predators, and the males will also build and guard nests as well. And then lastly, we have the crappie that fall into this group. So in Missouri, we've got the white crappie and the black crappie. The genus Pomoxis means opercle sharp. So that refers to the spines on their gill cover. The adults at their biggest can reach up to 15 inches and 4 pounds. And they have a lifespan of up to about 8 years. They also are an important aquatic predators like the sunfish and the bass. And they're a really popular fan fish for recreational fishing, especially for ice fishing as well in the winter. Our next group are the darters. A quick caveat, most of the darters that we have in the state, you're not going to find in the Missouri River itself. You're going to find them either in direct tributaries or in a lot of the small streams around the state. But I really wanted to highlight this group because they're a favorite of mine. So they've been described as the hummingbirds of the fish world because they are colorful, small, and quick. They live on the bottom of rivers, especially in fast-moving and usually clear water. Missouri has approximately 44 darter species. So if you remember, we have about 244 species in the state. And the darters are only found in North America. So we actually have about 21% of all darter species in the world in Missouri. Of those 44 species, 7 of those are state endangered. 10 species are species of conservation concern, which just means that we're kind of keeping an eye on them because they seem like they're declining, but we may not need to intervene just yet. And then 3 species are endemic. And so what this means is that you can only find them in Missouri and nowhere else in the world. Many of the darters do not exceed 3 inches, with the exception of some of the bigger species like the log perch, which can get up to about 7 inches. And as I mentioned, nearly all species reside in small streams in the Ozarks and the lowlands, but you can find a good number of darter species in, say, like the Gasconade and the Osage River that do flow into the Missouri River. Within this kind of same group of perches, we also have the walleye. So their scientific name refers to the German common name for the European relative, the sander, and vitreous meaning glassy, which refers to their eyes. So if you've ever seen a walleye in person, especially at night, and you see their eyes glowing, there's a material called tapetum lucidum at the back of their eye that reflects light, which makes them excellent predators under low light conditions, which makes sense that they're nocturnal predators. The adults can reach about 12 to 28 inches and 8 or more pounds, and they're a really popular recreational sport fish. They also have kind of little needle-like fish, like the gar, just much fewer. They're not quite as scary, but they still look a little tough. And then a very similar, closely related and similar looking species is the sauger. So their scientific name, they have the same genus as the walleye, so that refers to their common name of their German relative. And the canadensis means from Canada. The adults can reach 12 to 15 inches and up to 4 pounds, and their lifespan is up to about 10 years. They're also a popular sport fish, but less so than the walleye. They're often also found in more turbid water than the walleye. And this is thought that because their eyes are better adapted to lower light, they can survive well in turbid water when there's even less light coming through than you would find in clear water. And then the last group I want to talk about are the drum. So in Missouri, we have the freshwater drum. Their scientific name means singleback, which refers to the single dorsal fin, which is connected here along their back, and grunting. So these fish will actually make a grunting or a drumming noise when they're reproducing by vibrating their swimming bladder. You should definitely look up videos of it later because it's a really cool sound. The adults can get quite large, reaching 12 to 20 inches and up to 40 pounds, and they have a lifespan of about 13 years. They're also really important recreationally and commercially, and the meat is pretty good to eat. And then it's great that we got a question earlier about how to age fish. So this is actually a picture of some of those ear bones or those otoliths. And it's been recorded that Native Americans have made jewelry from those otoliths or those ear bones, and they were also referred to as lucky stones. So since they're basically made of bone, they'll last forever, and so they really do make great jewelry. This is also a really important species for some of the mussels that we find in the state as well. So the freshwater drum is the only known fish host for an endangered species of mollusk called the scale shell mussel. So without the freshwater drum co-occurring in the same rivers as that mussel, they would not be able to reproduce. Yeah. So the question was, can I describe the process of how a fish could serve as a host for mussels? So some mussel species will have what's called a lure. So it's something that kind of looks like a worm or a fish that they can put out of their shell and move around to attract fish. And a fish might swim by that and think that it's a prey item. And when they go to strike and bite, that lure is actually made up of a bunch of structures that have Glaucidia, which are the larval stage for the mussel. And so when they burst, it breaks those sacs open, and then they get all of those Glaucidia past their gills. And some of those mussels, if it's a suitable fish host, they can actually stick onto the gills, and they'll parasitize off of the fish until they're developed enough to fall off and then become free living. So having those fish co-occur is really important, especially in cases like this with the freshwater drum where they're the only known fish host. So some mussels are generalists, so they might be able to have, say, 4 or 5 different sunfish species plus drum plus moon eye that could serve as the host. But then there are some like this where without the freshwater drum, this mussel cannot use another fish host. I'm gonna say Caleb's here, he can answer that. Just to recap, just for folks who are online, Caleb's answer to that question about do all mussels use fish hosts? The answer was most mussels do use a fish host. There is one species that uses mud puppies, and there are some that don't require any hosts at all, but it is pretty common for mussels to require a fish host. Thanks, Caleb. So we've spent a lot of time talking about fish in the Missouri River and fish diversity in Missouri. So why do we care? Why is this diversity important? So in the United States and Canada, we have 1,200 species of freshwater fish and 36 families that inhabit our habitats. And we have about 250 of those species. So having that diversity is really important just from a biodiversity standpoint, just appreciating that diversity, but also knowing that those fish are providing different resources and different functions in their ecosystem that other species might not be able to replace if they were to come in those places. Sport fishing is also a really popular recreational activity, but only about 5% of that 1,200 fish are considered sport fish. So 95% of the fish in North America are not actually sport fish. There are non-game fish species. In general, fish provide a really important ecological link in the food chain, especially a lot of those smaller bodied fishes that you're finding in the smaller streams that are eating a lot of that plant material and insects and then being eaten by larger fish or birds and mammals. Fish are also really important indicators of water quality and ecosystem health. So in general, if you find a stream or a river or a lake that has a lot of different types of fish in it, it's going to be a good indicator that that water body probably has good water quality and good habitat. So they're really good sentinels for river health in that way as well. And they're also a really important food source for humans. So a lot of the fish that we talked about today from the Missouri River provide a really important food source for us as well. And then we can think, why is stream health important? So we have the fish, right? But then what about the water and what about the stream itself? So healthy rivers provide a lot of functions for us and for the environment. So they help to support a lot of biodiversity. So all of our fish diversity in Missouri is supported by our variety and our quality of habitats that we have here. Healthy rivers also provide some climate resilience. So they host a lot of trees and their riparian buffers and a lot of plants that help to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. They also provide a really good learning opportunity for our next generation of leaders and scholars that are working in and around the rivers and our fresh water. They provide strong economies with a lot of jobs through commercial fisheries, any industry that uses water, as well as agriculture. They provide healthy communities, so they give us access to open space for recreation and just for mental health and wellness as well. They provide flood safety by buffering floodwaters into floodplains and also cleaning a lot of that water and the pollutants out of it in our floodplains and our wetlands as well. And then it also just helps us conserve our fresh water through restoring and keeping healthy streams. So we get a lot of really great benefits from keeping our rivers healthy. And then I also just wanted to end on what can we do to help make our rivers healthy and to help keep them healthy. So there's a lot of different ways that we can work on this both as individuals as well as agencies. So in my role at the Missouri Department of Conservation, I'm coordinating a statewide program called the Resource Assessment and Monitoring Program, where we're going out into small streams throughout the state to look at the fish communities, the insect communities that live in the water quality and the physical habitat, so that we can identify areas of the state that are healthy, and we can also look at areas that need more effort put into them to make them healthier in the future. So long-term monitoring programs like mine in small streams, as well as a lot of the big river surveys that are being done too, are really important to help us kind of see where we're at on that kind of spectrum of a poor stream up to like a really healthy stream. We can also engage in a lot of citizen science. So MDC has Missouri Stream Team that works with getting folks out into streams all over the state to look at water quality and the insect communities that live there, macroinvertebrates. We also have the master naturalists, which are folks that can learn more about their outdoor environments and how they can keep them healthy. We can also focus on education and outreach. So you can go to the nature centers all over the state or participate in events with education and outreach with Missouri River Relief. And if you own property or you have family that owns property in Missouri, you can also take steps to maintain or restore stream health. So this could look like things like reducing stream crossings if you have a low water crossing going over your stream, or increasing your riparian buffer to help control against excess flooding. So there's a lot of different options that we can take, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means as well. But there's lots of stuff that all of us can do to help keep our rivers and our fisheries intact and healthy. And that's all I have for you. Thank you all so much for coming.
So how far upstream do the sturgeon and the other big fish come up? See, each of the first, how far do those large fish come up? Do they come up at all?
I don't know. I don't know, Tom, do you have any answers to that?
Will you go back to your first slide?
This one or the title slide?
Are you going to go through those?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so this one is a white crappie, spotted bass. I believe that one's the walleye. This is a slenderhead darter. These two are chubs. This is the sturgeon chub. I forget which one this is. It might be the freckled chub. This is the lake sturgeon, the freshwater drum, and a long ear sunfish.
Okay, and then follow up with a couple more. You said that some of the minnows are short lived. What's short lived?
That could be usually like up to probably 3 years. A lot of the mosquito fish, they're not the minnows, but like mosquito fish usually don't live much more than a year or two. But a lot of the minnows and shiners, you're going to see them on the older end, probably at like 3 to 4 years.
And then we talked about the eel and all the female stocks. So, why don't the males come up?
That's a great question. I'm not I'm not certain. If I had to guess, the males are smaller bodied and it takes a lot of energy for migration. And so if there's no need for them to go up into fresh water,
But nothing about the metabolism or their, if they eat salt water, they just don't grow up.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
A lot of the fish that, or well, I shouldn't say a lot, the fish that are do migrate from saltwater to freshwater or freshwater to saltwater, they do have the ability to osmoregulate, so they don't have an issue. Like, for example, if you were to take a freshwater fish and put it in the ocean, it's not going to survive, or an ocean fish and put it in freshwater, it won't survive. But the fish that do those migrations can make those physiological changes at the start of that migration to be able to handle the differences between the saltwater and the freshwater. So I'm not sure with the eel if the males don't have that ability. My guess is it just that they don't have the need to go, so it would be energetically wasteful, but I'm not certain. In the eels reproduce in the like estuaries, kind of in the saltwater on the coast. Where, I don't know exactly. I know when I was going to grad school, well, they're kind of an elusive species. I know when I was in Texas for grad school, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department had a citizen science program where they were putting out mop heads in a lot of the estuaries and small streams to kind of act as habitat to attract the larval eels to see if there was reproduction happening. So I think, I mean, there's a good bit of reproduction that happens along the Gulf Coast for the ones that are migrating down through the Mississippi River, but I believe there's a lot of reproduction happening on the East Coast as well, but I'm not totally certain on that.
You talked about sport fish, and that only 5% of all these species that are found in Missouri are sport fish. Do you, could you explain, number one, what's considered a sport fish? And then number two, with the event of microfishing, do you see that percentage increasing?
Love that question. I don't know what the technical definition for sport fish would be, but I personally would define it as any fish species that has some sort of economic kind of importance behind it. So examples of that would be like rainbow trout in Missouri. Like people are seeking out opportunities to fish for a certain species, either to eat it or just for the fun of catching it. So a lot of your fish that you're not intentionally targeting would then be your non-game fish. But I do think with microfishing, I know a lot of folks that I work with in the department that have lists running and they're seeing who can hit 100 species first or who can get fish from every county in Missouri first. And so people have like life lists like you do for birding, but with fish and microfishing now. And it is a really growing trend. So I hope more people get into it. The little fish are super fun. For my work specifically,
Or the population, how is that? What are the,
yeah, a lot of that depends on where you're sampling and what type of fish you're targeting. So for my work in small streams, we're using electrofishing. So we're putting a little bit of electricity out in the water to stun the fish and scoop them up with nets. We're using seines that we can drag through the water to kind of scoop fish up. When you're in the bigger rivers, you can use big trawls that can focus on, mid-water column, depending on what the fish you're targeting are, or on the bottom, you can use gill nets, which just set out in the water, and the fish, when they swim through them, their operculum will get kind of stuck on the net, and then you can pull them out of that. People use like trot lines for surveying fish. Sometimes you can use sonar for looking for certain types of fish if they have a really unique body shape or behavior. So it kind of depends, but there's a huge variety that you can use, and it depends if you're targeting a specific species or you're doing community sampling and you just kind of want to see what's there.
volume of water or whatever?
Yeah, exactly. So for any of those sampling techniques that I talked about, we can calculate what we call catch per unit effort. So for my work with seining, that's calculated as we record the amount of time that we're physically sampling with that seine. And then we can see how many fish we got and how much time we spent sampling. So you can do that with any of those methods as well. So it depends. So for my work with the RAM program, we're sampling for fish from June 1st to September 15th, and we don't sample outside of that window. But for some of the work that's being done on the bigger rivers, looking at sturgeon, there might be sampling during the winter or the spring, depending on what they're looking at. So it kind of depends on what the goals of the sampling are and what you're trying to measure. But fisheries biologists are busy mostly year round.
Question from online asking any safety issues with consuming fish from the Missouri River?
That's a great question. So I would say any river in the US, you should probably look at safety considerations for eating fish. One of the biggest issues you'll run into is mercury concentrations in fish. PFAS is also kind of a new thing to be on the lookout for fish, and PCBs as well, depending on the water body. The Missouri River, I don't specifically know, but for most big bodies of water like the Missouri River, you can look up consumption advisory guidelines for fish, and it'll tell you specifically for the type of fish that you'd like to consume. For example, you might look up a long-nosed gar versus a freshwater drum versus a crappie, and it'll tell you what's safe for if you are a woman of reproductive age, a man, or a child, and how many meals or servings you should consume within a certain amount of time to be safe.
Sampling earlier. So I know at CERC they do this thing called eDNA sampling. It's like a newer technique that's pretty efficient when it comes to catch per unit effort. Do you guys do that at MDC too?
We do definitely have folks at MDC that are using eDNA. I don't with my program, but it is a really great method for going out, because even with some of those sampling methods that I talked about, sometimes fish are there and we just can't detect them. They're much faster than us. They're really good at evading some of the sampling tools that we use. And so eDNA is a really nice tool that we can use as well to kind of see what's there without actually sampling it. That being said, it is really helpful when you have the fish in hand, so you can verify for sure that you've caught that fish there or whatever species you're looking at. But the eDNA, I think, is a really good indicator that you could use to then kind of target your sampling efforts in a specific area where you've gotten like a positive hit for the eDNA, or you're going to waste your time if there's no eDNA there. You might reduce the sampling you're doing in one region and kind of put the effort somewhere else. Yeah, so the question was, where can you look at kind of the safety concerns associated with eating fish for certain water bodies? And that was the Department of the Department of Health and Senior Services.
Question from Steve Olson in Hartsburg. He asked, can you speak on how non-sport fish populations are monitored in the Missouri River?
So those would be monitored more with the community sampling. I'm not as familiar with those techniques because my experience is working in small streams, but you can use a lot of different types of sampling tools, like the trawls, for example, versus the gill nets. The gill nets would be less effective on the really small fish, but a lot of the bottom trawls, you could get some of like the chubs, for example. Yeah, I would say in general, if you're trying to target the small bodied fish, you would just use the techniques that are specific to those in the big rivers.
It seems like a lot of the fish are edible to humans, but I haven't heard of most of them on a menu. So do people tend to sell them like, oh, this is a blank kind of fish, but it really could be any number of similar flesh. You know what I mean? Like it's sold as bass, but it isn't really bass. Or sold as crappie, but it isn't really crappie. Are you familiar with that about like what's used in that way commercially?
I don't know of any instances where fish are being marketed as one thing when in reality they are other things in Missouri. That definitely happens, especially with like the global kind of fisheries and food supply chain. Sometimes that's kind of like a rebranding to get people who might be a little iffy about eating a certain kind of fish. If you just rename it and then they kind of have those conceptions out of their head, they're willing to try it. I know that a lot of those invasive carp, like the big head and the silver, have been renamed as Kobe as a way to try to get people out of their head about eating carp. Because those species in particular are one of the most popular aquaculture species in the world, but we don't like to eat them here. It's not really so much from the flavor. There's a lab at the University of Missouri that's done a bunch of blind taste tests with carp, and people tend to really like it, sometimes even more than catfish. So sometimes it's just kind of those preconceived notions that people have. But I do think people should be eating fish. It's a really good protein source. And if you are concerned about contaminants in fish, eating fish that are lower on the food chain, they're not going to have accumulated as many of those contaminants. So eating your more predatory species are where you're going to probably have more likely to have higher contaminants versus if you're eating things like the smallmouth buffalo or like any of those buffalo, like your more herbivorous fish. But we do have quite a bit of edible fish in Missouri.
We have another question from online. Kimberly would like to know, how did you develop your passion for fish?
Oh, that's a fun question. I grew up fishing a little bit, and I always thought it was just fine. Like my family we didn't go fishing or do that very often. And then I went to school for undergrad. We had a fish class, but there were no labs. It was just looking at brown preserved fish in the lab, which were really hard to ID. And then I did my master's with biological soil crust. So I was actually looking at fungi and bacteria on the soil surface in some like kind of drier like desert communities. And then I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for grad school. And I knew that I really liked community ecology. And I took an opportunity in Texas to work in a lab that works with fish. So it was my first time working with fish. I learned how to ID them and sample them during grad school. And I just fell in love. I also taught a fish diversity and ecology class during my PhD, and so I had to develop a lot of the course material. So I was doing a ton of reading about fish and their phylogeny and their ecology, and to make all of that course content. And so, yeah, I caught the bug.
What's the difference between fish and fishes? Okay, I really want you all to know what the difference between fish and fishes is. So, do that before you leave.
So my understanding is that fish refers to multiple individuals of the same species. So if I had 10 freshwater drum, I would have 10 fish. But if I had some long-eared sunfish, some freshwater drum, some lake sturgeon, then I would call that fishes because it's multiple different species.
Okay, thank you so much, Brittany.
Thank you all.